Let's now look at the contraction stress test. The contraction stress test used to be called the oxytocin challenge test, or the CST, contraction stress test. The contraction stress test looks at intervillous space flow. And here you can see in the placenta, the villi has been cut off of here, but the villi bring the umbilical artery blood in the blue from the fetus. In the intravillous space, there is exchange of oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrition, and the good, healthy stuff flows back through the umbilical vein. As a contraction builds up and gets stronger and stronger, what do you think happens to the intravillous blood flow? It gets less and less and less until you have 40 millimeters of mercury, and at that time, the intravillous blood flow basically stops. Can this fetus make it by holding its breath for 30, 40 seconds? That's the question. So we are stressing the fetus by decreasing the intravillous blood flow. When you hear the term CST, I would like you to think of late decelerations, not accelerations, but late decelerations. So we've got to assess if there are contractions. How do we do that? We use this external tocotransducer. The business end is over here. It has this button which pushes out. It is spring-loaded. You put this on the mother's abdomen. It pushes in the mother's abdomen. When a contraction comes along and tightens, it pushes this plunger in, and that deflection is then registered on the paper as a contraction. So here we have the US ultrasound. Here is the TOCO, the measurement of contractions. So we have the fetal heart rate and the contractions being monitored here. The CST is based upon what happens with decreased intravillous blood flow with uterine contractions. The prerequisites, you must have adequate stress, and that stress is defined as 3 or more contractions in 10 minutes. Now, you don't want to have too many contractions because then you will get hyperstimulation. There are situations in which you would want to avoid having contractions, and those are wherever contractions are inappropriate, such as previous classical uterine incision, premature rupture of membranes, incompetent cervix, placenta previa. The interpretation of the contraction stress test. If there are no late decelerations, we call that a negative, and that's what you'd like to have. If there are repetitive late decelerations with the contractions, we call that a positive CST. Now, usually you want to be a positive person. In this case, you want to be a negative. Here we have a fetal monitor tracing, and here are the contractions, 1, 2, and 3. Let me draw you a line that shows the baseline heart rate. We see here there's an acceleration, here's an acceleration, here's an acceleration. So this is a reactive NST. Are there any late decelerations? No. So this is a negative CST. Reactive NST, negative CST. Often we will shorten that and say reactive, negative CST. How about this one? Are there any accelerations? No. Non-reactive NST. We have 3 contractions in 10 minutes. Are there any late decelerations? No. So this would be a negative CST. Non-reactive NST, negative CST. Why is this the way it is? Why is there no accelerations? Well, maybe the baby's sleeping, or it could be a drug or medication effect, and the baby is sedated. This is normally what you would see in labor if the mom was given morphine. Perhaps there's a fetus with a CNS anomaly that prevents the heart rate from increasing. If you have a negative CST, no late decelerations, the fetal death rate is 1 per 1,000. This is the same as a biophysical profile of 8 or 10. Very reassuring. The reason we don't typically do a CST is because time and money. You've got to get an IV going. You're going to have to get an infusion pump. You have to have a nurse who gradually increases the infusion rate. Much more time consuming and expensive. That's why we would prefer to do a biophysical profile before a CST. In your notes, under fetal monitoring, are the three kinds of decelerations. There's the early decelerations, the variable decelerations, and this is the one that we're concerned with, late decelerations. Look at this tracing. Here's a contraction, here's a contraction, here's a contraction. This is the beginning of the deceleration. Notice this is the peak of the contraction. But the lowest point of the deceleration isn't until over here. The deceleration is late in reference to the contraction. They always come late. This is a significant late deceleration. This is a smaller one as a response to this contraction. This is one which is in between. And it varies on how strong the contraction is. But there are three late decelerations, each after a contraction. This is a positive CST. Do you see any accelerations? No. Non-reactive NST. By the way, what's a baseline heart rate? Normal should be 110 to 160. This is a baseline heart rate of 180. So we have tachycardia, decreased variability, non-reactive, positive CST. This baby's not doing well. Repetitive late decelerations after 50% or more of the contractions. This is not reassuring. The most common indication for a CST, we already talked about this, is biophysical profile of 4 or 6. The criteria for a fetal heart rate late deceleration is a gradual drop in the heart rate, a gradual return, but always delayed relative to the uterine contraction. It is not simultaneous as you'd expect with an early deceleration. With variable decelerations, it's a rapid drop and a rapid return. This is gradual and delayed. With a negative CST, where there are no late decelerations with 3 contractions in 10 minutes, management, reassuring. Repeat as indicated. If you have a positive CST with 50% or more late decelerations with 3 contractions in 10 minutes, this is not good. Ominous. This baby could very well die in utero. This would be indications for a prompt delivery, usually cesarean. Okay, NST reactive, great. NST non-reactive, vibroacoustic stimulation. Vibroacoustic stimulation brings a reactive tracing, great. If it doesn't, biophysical profile. Biophysical profile 8 or 10, great, no problem. Biophysical profile 0 or 2, delivery. 4 or 6, we do a CST. Negative, no problem. Positive, delivery. Okay, this is in your notes, and we're going to look at some practice cases. And I can't imagine on the exam you would have tracings other than these 5. First, reactive NST. How do you evaluate this strip? Are there any contractions? No, so we cannot do a CST. Are there accelerations? Yes, there are, 2 of them. Therefore, we will call this reactive NST. What's the interpretation? Excellent. Baby's good. No need to do anything. Non-reactive NST. How do you evaluate this strip? Any contractions? No. What we see here are maternal breathing. Are there any accelerations? There's no accelerations. So we will call this non-reactive NST. What's our interpretation here? Baby in trouble? I don't know. More testing. What shall we do? Vibroacoustic stimulation. All right. Now we do NST and CST. Whenever you're doing an NST, you look for the presence or absence of accelerations. When you do a CST, you look for the presence of contractions and if there are any late decelerations. So we can look for the NST component, which is an indication of fetal movement. We can look at the CST and late decelerations, which is a reflection of the intravillous blood flow. How do you evaluate this strip? Are there contractions? 1, 2, 3, yes. So we can say this is a CST. Are there any late decelerations? No. This is a negative CST. Let's look at the NST function. Are there any accelerations? Yes, there are. 3 accelerations. This is a reactive NST, negative CST. How do you evaluate this baby? This baby is okay for 2 reasons. 1, you know there is adequate intravillous space flow, and 2, the fetus is moving. This baby's doing well. Next strip, non-reactive NST, negative CST. How do you evaluate this strip? Are there contractions? Yes, there are 3 in 10 minutes. Are there late decelerations? No decelerations at all. So we can call this a negative CST. Are there any accelerations? I don't see any accelerations. So we call this a non-reactive NST. So non-reactive NST, negative CST. How do you evaluate this baby? Intravillous blood flow is okay, but the baby's not moving. It is probably sleeping or it is medicated. This is the worst strip you could possibly have. A non-reactive NST, positive CST. How do you evaluate this strip? Are there contractions? 1, 2, 3. Yes. Are there any late decelerations? Whoa. 1, 2, 3. Here's a contraction, late deceleration. Here's a contraction, late deceleration. Here's a contraction, late deceleration. This would be a positive CST. Next, are there any accelerations? Do you see any accelerations here? I don't see any. It's very flat. We'll call this a non-reactive NST, positive CST. Notice the baseline fetal heart rate. It's about 180 beats a minute. So we have tachycardia, decreased variability, non-reactive NST, positive CST. How do you interpret this baby? This is in trouble. This baby needs to be delivered vite, quickly. Get it out. Let me help you a little bit here. Here is the beginning of the contraction in the dotted line, the heavy dotted line. And you notice the deceleration doesn't occur until the peak of the contraction. The lowest point of the deceleration, the contraction is almost gone, but this baby still hasn't recovered. It doesn't recover till over here. These are repetitive late decelerations. Not good. And that is the end of contraction stress test.